Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, and we are back with a live reaction. Very raw and very recently off of these two crazy games that we just got blessed with, watching. And, before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates. And Chris, please take it away and break down these crazy games.
Yeah, so what a game. What two games did we just get? Just some crazy, ridiculous, great basketball. This is why we love the playoffs. This is why we love NBA basketball. I guess we'll start off with the one that just happened, right? And that's the Clippers and the Nuggets. Game 2 in Denver with the Clippers taking it 105-102. And it's kind of funny because we went into this game. We saw what the Nuggets did in game 1 where they were able to come away with it in overtime. And we picked the Nuggets to win the series. But we didn't feel great about, even though they won game 1, we didn't feel amazing about it because it just felt like there was a lot that kind of had to eventually go their way in order to pull off the game. The Clippers had to turn the ball over a ton. You needed some big production from Jamal Murray, Westbrook with some corner threes. And it's funny because in this game, it was kind of more of the same, right? Where, you got the Russ corner threes. Actually, Jamal Murray was better, funny enough. Michael Porter Jr., who got benched in game 1, right, was better. But then you actually look at Jokic, and he just didn't have a great game. He had 26, 10 and 12, 8 of 16, 4 of 8 from 3, but 7 turnovers, 6 of 10 from the free throw line, including a number of late game free throws that he missed, which he also missed in the first game. But they were able to kind of, make way and kind of get away with it with, the other stuff that happened in overtime. And it just felt like, even though the stat line doesn't really look bad, I felt like this was a pretty poor, mediocre game from him. Like, the fact that he could have a stat line like that still kind of shows how awesome he is. But it just felt like, this is one of those games where it felt like if you just looked at the straight box score, it doesn't look bad. But if you rewatch it, it looks a lot worse. And then on the other side, you look at the Clippers, and you got a ridiculous game from Kawhi, right? And this is a guy who the last couple of months has been playing great basketball and looks pretty much like how he looked, even before the last few string of injuries he had. Because when he first came back earlier in the season, he, was still playing fine, but he didn't look quite as explosive, right? He didn't look like the game was quite as easy for him. But now he's just in a complete rhythm. Even defensively, he made some huge plays, 2 steals and a block. But the offense, where in this game he had 39 points, 15 of 19 from the field, 4 of 7 from 3, on almost exclusively jump shots. Like, there were not a lot of shots where he was, driving to the rim and getting, a bunch of layups and dunks to go. He had, like, I guess, a couple breakaway layups, drives, or whatever you want to call it. Obviously had some free throw attempts, but just a ridiculous shooting display, right? After we just saw one the other night, I guess we can get into those games eventually too. But, I mean, this was a game where Kawhi, despite, Jokic's stat line, Kawhi was the best player on the floor. And that was kind of the difference tonight in a game where, even when you look at the Clippers, other guys like Harden was okay. Not quite as good as the first game. He had 18 and 7, 7 of 17, 4 of 11 from 3 is fine. But, just kind of an okay performance from him, right? Decent. Chris Dunn, right? 6 rebounds, 3 steals, 5 points. Again, not a ton offensively, but he did provide a lot of value on the defensive end, which we know he's done. And he had a tough matchup, right? Because he's trying to guard Jamal Murray, and Jamal Murray was really good in this game by and large. And then you look at Zubac doing his thing with 16 and 12. Norman Powell, I don't know, looks kind of hasn't really looked as impressive so far in his first couple of postseason games. He did hit some big shots late in the game. So he, after a pretty horrendous, overall play for most of the game, but he made the big shots when it mattered. But this largely was kind of one with the magic of Kawhi. And then on the Nuggets, and it's just kind of rough because a lot of the stuff that didn't go the Clippers' way in the first game kind of flipped, and a lot of things didn't go the Nuggets' way in this game. They ended up having 20 turnovers. They shot very poorly from the free throw line, 14 for 22. And again, it's rough because you shot better from 3 in this game. I mean, you look at the 3-point shooting. Porter hit a couple threes. Jokic was 4 for 8. Murray was 4 for 8. Westbrook was 3 for 6. And you just didn't get like I said, a good enough game, I feel like, from your best player to be able to kind of overcome it. And again, like the Nuggets are in a different spot than they were the last couple of seasons. And like defensively, it's not as bad as it was in the regular season, but it's just rough because it just felt like they just came up short, and kind of like the Clippers in the first game made a number of mistakes at the end of the game, just some bungled plays, right? Like Gordon missed a dunk. Porter got hurt, but right before he got hurt, he turned the ball over and allowed the Clippers to score. And every time a mistake was made, like both teams made them pay, but the Clippers were the ones that turned the ball over early. But then they settled in, and they only finished the game with 11 turnovers, right? Which is a big improvement from game one, where they had 20 turnovers. And that was kind of the key for the Clippers. Was in the second half, they took care of the ball, pretty much had it in Kawhi's hands for most of it, and he made him pay. The Nuggets doubled a little bit, but by and large, it was a lot of single coverage. They did kind of try to blitz at different points. Then you had the last play where Westbrook, I guess, is kind of hedging, right? Kind of like in a spot where he's kind of there, but not really, right? And then he just doesn't get there. And then, Kawhi hits the dagger shot over Gordon. And I don't really know what you do with that, right? Because I mean, he was just in his zone. It wasn't like a lot of the shots that he made were, a lot of them were just super tough shots, and some of it was like, yeah, you got to start sending doubles and blitzing him. You can't let him continue to play one on one, because if a guy's cooking you like that, I mean, you got to make adjustments. But just kind of rough. It just felt like some of the margins in terms of the plays is kind of where the Nuggets lost the game. Like I said, similar to the Clippers in the first game. And again, you didn't have a great game for Jokic. Like the Nuggets or the Clippers defended him about as well as they could. I mean, again, like the stat line is there, but the turnovers and kind of forcing him to have to work against Zubac, because I mean, Zubac, is a guy where he is a threat out there on both ends of the floor. He's a big physical guy, and that's kind of your best bet, is to wear him down. There were a couple of possessions where Chris Dunn would come in kind of from these blind spots and come in and just take the ball, and they did that a lot, right? And that's kind of your best bet, is you kind of have to swarm him and kind of force him into these spots where he might have to think a little too much, right? And that's kind of what you have to do with those type of players that are very high IQ players, where if you make them overthink it, you might be able to force them to make a mistake. Welcome back, Xander Cade. We haven't seen you in
Oh
quite
wow.
some time. He says Clippers in 7. And again, for the Clippers to win the series, they needed to take one of these two games, right? If they came out of here without a single win, not saying the series would be over, but it'd be probably a lot harder for the Clippers to win. But with them getting the split in Denver, it's all you needed if you're the Clippers. So now you get the split. You just have to hold home court, hope the Nuggets don't take a game in LA, and this series is going to go the distance.
Yeah, I think this is the pathway to a 7 game series, where teams are going to go, back and forth quite literally until it comes to, that game 7. And, in this game, I think you saw a lot that you liked from both of these teams, but the Nuggets at the end of the day completely let this game slip right through their hands. Multiple times they had momentum, multiple times they made the clutch play, and, they just kind of sold it. Like we're missing wide open dunks, we're just throwing the ball away. It seems like, Jokic was really, in his own head in this game, really. And like you talked about, the stat line looks solid, but, if you really divulge into it and, really dissect it, you could tell that it just wasn't the best version of Jokic that we're used to really seeing. This wasn't the MVP version. It really felt like a shell of himself. And, I think they had, some things going for them positively. Kawhi does this once every 2 years, Nugs in 6.
Oh,
Oh wow, okay, interesting.
okay.
Welcome Untamed though. Um, but yeah, you had like some swing pieces like Michael Porter Jr. kind of showing up, and I think he was a difference maker when he was in. Aaron Gordon I think wasn't as productive, so you kind of saw a step back from the Nuggets. But I think a lot of people did expect the Clippers to not really just go away like that, and man, Kawhi, what a performance from him. I think that's where it starts. That's
Yep.
that's unbelievable. His
That's the
shots,
difference.
yeah, his shot selection, he just outplayed everybody on the Nuggets. And I think when that's gonna happen, that's when, the Nuggets are truly in danger, because they don't really have anyone that can match it if he's playing at that kind of level with that kind of efficiency, and he's not turning the ball over. That's the key. I think if he's not turning the ball over and he's making smart decisions, then The Nuggets will for sure be in trouble. And if it's inverted and Jokic is, turning the ball over and not making the best of decisions and, other guys as well, it's a trickle down effect. So, like you said, kind of inverse scenario here of what we saw in game one versus what we saw in game two from both of these teams.
Yeah, like this is a series that's going to be won on the margins. So whatever margins you can make up, whether or not it's the rebounding battle, like if you look at the Nuggets, they had 15 offensive rebounds to the Clippers 7. That seems to be an advantage that the Nuggets have. But like we said, the first game, Clippers had 20 turnovers. Nuggets had 20 turnovers in this game. You have that many turnovers in a game, you probably will lose. And even then, it was right there for the taking. But that's that, like I said, Kawhi is really the difference in this game. Where if you're talking about it coming down to the stars, and Kawhi is the best player on the floor, Clippers are going to win the series, right? That's kind of usually how this works when you're talking about two teams that are pretty close, right, in terms of how good they are, right? It feels like the Clippers have been the better team for the last few months, right? And they had the same amount of wins, and that was with Kawhi playing less than half the season, right? So clearly there's, again, like we talked about, this was a great opportunity for the Clippers to kind of show everybody that, like, hey, you're talking about all these other teams in the Western Conference, that you think might have a chance, but hey, it might be us. We might actually be the other team that can challenge Oklahoma City. Again, still have to stay healthy, but so far, so good in terms of what you've seen from them. And like I said, all they needed to do was win one game in Denver in the first two games. And if they do that, they very much have a chance to win this series. But we had the Nuggets winning this in 7. But like I said, it's a toss-up. It's a coin flip. Because this game was a coin flip. Because it felt like for a while, it felt like the Clippers kind of had an advantage. Then the Nuggets kind of came back. When the Clippers went up 6 in the fourth, it felt like that might have been the game where it was like a couple of just costly Nuggets turnovers. What does that say? Tick Jokic, Jokic, Clips in 5.
Wow. All right.
Yeah, Nuggets free throws lost the game again. Like I said, and it's gonna be a series won on the margins because again, like you said, in a 3-point loss, going 14 of 22 from the line, a big difference, like Keith Wells said. And again, 20 turnovers in a 3-point loss, while the Clippers only turned it over 11 times. We'll see. Like I said, we picked the Nuggets to win the series, but I mean, if Kawhi's going to play like that, that's going to tilt the series in the Clippers' favor. And as long as he can have somebody come along with him for the ride, right? Like it was a little bit of a mix because you got Harden, who again was not as good as the first game. Then you had, Zubac, who was good. Norman Powell hasn't been great the first 2 games, but he hit the big shots in the end. Coaching matters from Keith Wells, and that's a big thing too because the argument against the Nuggets is the Clippers have been playing great the last couple of months. The Nuggets have not. And then they also recently fired their coach and their GM. So now they have a guy who's not coached who's not been a head coach before in the NBA. And he's kind of trying to, man the ship, right? And kind of make sure that everything's going okay. And, it's funny because you're not normally used to the Nuggets making those type of mistakes in a close game. It usually feels like if it's a close game, they're probably going to pull it out. But, stuff like that, sometimes can come down to coaching. Because, again, you can't allow Kawhi to play one-on-one when he's just in a zone like that. You just can't. Like, I think you kind of have to just bank on it. He might turn the ball over, if you kind of blitz him in a way where you can kind of force him to make a decision.
Yep.
Other than allow him, you can't just allow him to go one-on-one. I mean,
and they left him open, too. That was very
and they left him open, too. Yeah, because he made a big corner 3 late in the game where he was, like, completely open. And just like, again, we know the Nuggets have not been very good defensively this season.
Sure.
And that's been kind of one of their downfalls this year, right? Is, again, we talked about it. Lack of depth, lack of defense, and lack of volume 3-point shooting. Because they do have guys that can hit threes, but they don't really have a lot of guys that can hit threes in high volume. And a lot of those guys, teams just aren't going to guard. Like, teams are going to be okay with Aaron Gordon shooting threes, even though he shot really well from 3 on the year. He shot over 40%. Christian Brown, teams are going to leave him open for 3, right? He had the 3 at the end that he did a step back, I guess, and thought he could make, right? And that's the other kind of stuff, right? Like at the end of the game, I think when you got the offensive rebound, probably should have just called a timeout.
I agree.
Just like, or even when they got the stop or whatever it was, like, they should have just called a timeout. I
Yes.
just don't you can trust that, like, you know, you're gonna be able to just kind of get whatever you want. Like, you needed to get a good possession going because they had been so careless with the ball, and you just needed to have, I think, a little bit more organization. And
Yeah,
like
calm it
you know,
down.
you said,
Slow it.
that's that's something on the margins where with the coaching where that can lose you a series potentially if it's really close, right? If you're just getting blown out every other game, that doesn't really matter. But
Right.
considering these two games have literally been decided by single possessions basically,
Mhm.
that makes a difference. Ty Lue's an experienced head coach who's won a championship and has been on, has coached a lot of really good teams.
Yeah.
Whereas Adelman, we don't know, right? He's been a guy that has, been considered for head coaching positions, but he hasn't gotten one yet. And this is his chance to kind of show maybe what he can do. But I don't know. It's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah. What do you make of the bench battle in this game?
Yeah, it's funny because again, Westbrook, he had his moments right in these games where
Mhm.
he was 3 of 6 from three,
Mhm.
had 4 rebounds, a
Mhm.
couple of offensive boards, was a -7, but he was overall relatively fine. It was
Mhm.
funny because part of the coaching thing was he kind of had to decide whether or not he wanted to go with Russ or go with Porter because both guys were playing well, and then there were times where he would have both of them in, but then when Porter got hurt at the end, he kind of wasn't able to have him in there.
Right.
Like that's a guy that I think you would have liked to have had out there for the final possession, but unfortunately with the shoulder bugging him,
Right.
he just didn't have it. Like that's a guy you miss. You'd rather him try to take the big three than Christian Brown, right? Even though Brown made the dagger three in the last game, Porter's a much better shooter, and he's a guy with length that can get off shots against pretty much anybody just because he's so tall. And that's but when you're talking about the bench, they did make a difference, right? Because DeAndre Jordan played after not playing at all in the first game, but he didn't really do much, right? Like you're just kind of buying time while Jokic is off the floor. And like if he's not going to, if you're just going to bleed possessions when Jokic isn't out there, I don't really know what you could do because like, Jalen Pickett was out there. I think he hit like a layup or a mid-range or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Peyton Watson was out there for like 13 minutes, but that's the problem is like Russ is really the only guy that you can remotely trust. And it's not even really that you can automatically trust him. It's just he's clearly the best player that they have off the bench. And he is versatile in some ways, but it's also tough to bank on him like actually having to win you games. And he was on track to win both of those games, but I just think if you're the Nuggets, you need one more guy, right? But even like when you look at the Clippers bench, I mean, Batum, was fine, right? He hit a couple threes, right? Derek Jones Jr. was solid, but then the other guys, Bogdanovich hasn't really done much in this series other than just getting picked on defensively.
Mhm.
And then Ben Simmons, I mean, again, it's kind of like you're just buying time while Zubac is out of the game,
Yeah.
right? Like neither team can really get away with having their big out of the game for most of the time because Zubac is so important to what the Clippers do on both ends of the floor. Because there were possessions where, or moments in the game where they're going small while Jokic is still out there,
Yeah.
right? And it feels like you almost kind of have to match Zubac's minutes with Jokic. But Jokic played 43 minutes, right? Can you get Zubac to go the distance there? I mean, and he played 40 minutes as well. So again, that's kind of the key. Like at the very least, Zubac, like let's see, Xander Cade mentioned Zubac better, but at the very least, he's a guy that Jokic has to at least respect, on both ends of the floor because he's a big guy with great touch.
Mhm.
And, again, he's probably not going to match him stat for stat, but he doesn't have to, right? Like he can, he's a big that can stay on the floor. He had 5 fouls in this game, but by and large, he does a great job of not picking up fouls and he gets it done on both ends of the floor. And they need him out there, right? And they need him, to be good. And he's been very dependable for them because you just
Yeah.
don't have anybody off the bench that you can probably trust when Zubac is not out there. I mean, maybe Batum, but that's if you go small. And
Yeah.
like, I don't know. I think in some situations it's tough, but neither bench is amazing. But it feels like the Clippers maybe have two guys, but the Nuggets really have one.
Yeah.
I mean, because like Watson, if his shot's not falling, it's kind of hard to have him out there.
Agreed.
And then Pickett, you just don't know what you're going to get from
Mhm.
him. And then DeAndre Jordan, I mean, like I said, he didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So it's just really it comes down, honestly, the starters and then like one guy off the bench, right? Because I
Yeah.
mean, look at the minute spread.
Yep. It's interesting though, but I mean, because I know a lot of people continuously had talked about the Clippers have the bench advantage, and I think that is something I think to monitor throughout the series. Because what if
Yeah,
one of those guys, on either team, pops off for a crazy, super efficient game and becomes like a swing piece all of a sudden?
yeah. And again, the thing with the Clippers is they're doing a pretty good job
Yeah.
defensively. Again, like the Nuggets were one of the best offensive teams in the league. And, you look at both of these games, they barely struggled to score over 100 points. So, that makes a huge difference in terms of what you're trying to see. I mean, the Nuggets scored 112 in the first game, but just as a whole, if it's a super low scoring game, that definitely benefits the Clippers. Because in a super low scoring game, you can probably bank on Kawhi is going to find a way to get you a shot. Maybe Harden finds you a way to get a shot. Or you could just dump it into Zubac. Or even like Norman Powell could just have a random stretch of 2 possessions where, again, wasn't really that good in this game, but he made the shots right at the end.
Yeah.
Whereas the Nuggets didn't have that. And like I said, that's another example of on the margin. So,
Mm-hmm.
again, we talked about it where this is why most people pick this series to go 7, regardless of who you think will win, because it feels like both teams are very evenly matched and both teams have advantages and disadvantages in certain areas. Like with the Clippers, like the 3-point percentage was not as good as Denver, but it feels like the Clippers just have more dependable 3-point shooters,
Agreed.
right? Whereas with the Nuggets, like, yeah, they shot 44%, but you're banking on Russell Westbrook, shooting really well from 3.
Mm-hmm.
And Aaron Gordon has shot well from 3 this year, but it just doesn't feel like compared to what the Clippers have to offer from the perimeter. It could be, like I said, a game that comes down to that, where, Leonard or Kawhi being a perimeter guy, I mean, that makes all the difference in the game.
Yeah.
That's really the difference.
Yeah.
It's just the fact that he went superhuman compared to, everybody else on the Nuggets was either like average, or like a slightly lesser version of himself. Because Murray was good.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen him play even better though. But like given what the Clippers have to throw at him, he played well.
Very
And
well.
then, Jokic, this was kind of this was not a great game from him.
Agreed.
And then like you said, Gordon was okay, average, right? Maybe a little below average. Porter was good, especially considering what he was doing in the first game where he was atrocious.
Yep.
Had 15 rebounds, so shout out to him for that. And then no one else was good at all. I mean, Westbrook was fine; he was solid, but
hit big
like
threes.
Brown wasn't really, Brown wasn't really good, and then the other bench guys, other than Russ, were basically useless.
Yeah, I think they just sold this game away mainly due to the coaching, like you said. I think the timeout would have helped so much. I feel like you would have gotten a better look, and you definitely would have probably walked away, even if you didn't make it. Like you probably would have walked away feeling a little bit less defeated and deflated, like you just lost the game just now. Like it's really bad.
Yeah, first game, Clippers probably should have won the game and gave it away with the turnovers. This game felt like the Nuggets could have won the game, but then they gave it away as well, and that's kind of the difference there. So I don't know what's going to happen in Game 3. Obviously, you're going to go to LA, but you're not going into the Crypto.com arena. You're going into the Intuit Dome. So that's going to be the first Clipper playoff game in the new home arena. We're going to see what it looks like, right? In the playoffs, because this is the first time in the new arena. Obviously, you got the wall, right? And they say that when the when the other team is shooting free throws in that area, it's a lot different than what it is in the other ones because it looks so different. It's a completely different setup.
Mm-hmm.
So in a series where, you lost the game because your best player, I mean, this isn't the only reason, but your best player shot poorly from the free throw line in both games because he didn't shoot well from the line in the first game either. It didn't hurt them, but it hurt them in this game for sure. So, that's kind of what it comes down to. But again, this is why it's going to be a great series because there's a lot of storylines, a lot of different matchups to look forward to in this game, or in this series, where a lot of talent on both sides. But it feels like the Clippers might have, the edge right now. But we'll see what happens in Game 3. Yeah. Then on the other end, not quite as amazing as this one, but it was close, right? Just from the perspective of, this was one where we whiffed on this one too, because we picked the Nuggets to win Game 2, didn't happen. We picked the Knicks to win Game 2, didn't happen either, right? The Pistons won 100-94, and it's funny right? Because this is another series where you look at that first game, and if things had gone a certain way, it'd be a completely different series, right?
Mhm.
Because in the first game, what happened? The Knicks were going into the fourth down 11, right? And then they went on a 21 to nothing run to seal the game, right? In a way where the Pistons just completely collapsed, right? In this one, right, the Pistons were up for most of the game, and it felt like they might have been ready for another collapse, but this time they were able to hang on, and the Knicks actually just, offensively had a pretty horrific performance,
Yeah.
right? Brunson was really good. He had 37 and 7. But then you look at Towns, pretty disappointing game,
Mhm.
right? 10 points, 6 rebounds. I think he had 0 points in the second half
Yeah.
and only took 3 shots, which is
Mhm.
the disappointing part because I thought he was really good in game 1. Bridges was better in this game. 19, 5, and 3 steals, but 3 of 11 from 3. Had the wide open 3 that would have tied it, and you just, that's a tough one because he was wide open.
Yep.
Didn't get as much from Josh Hart. He did add 7 rebounds and 5 assists, but 2 of 6 from the field. OG wasn't as good. And this was kind of the potential concern for the Knicks in the playoffs was we know offensively they've been really good all year. Defensively, they haven't been as good. But in the playoffs, what if the offense looks a little bit worse, right? Because you're going to have games in the playoffs where you're not going to shoot the ball as well. You're going to be cold, right? Maybe, they got to the free throw line a decent amount. They had 19 free throws, but look at the Pistons. They got there even more. They had 34. So, a low scoring game definitely benefits Detroit, right? Because they don't have as many offensive guys to really turn to. It's kind of a lot of I don't want to say hoping and praying, but it's kind of a lot of like relying on some other guys that are a little bit more of a wild card, right? Where you look at the Knicks starting five and you feel like anyone in that starting five could have like 20 points in a game.
Yeah.
But then you look at the Pistons and you saw what Cade Cunningham was doing. And we talked about this where there was a world where he struggled in the first game but then he might figure it out and be more comfortable, be way better in the second game. It's exactly what happened. He had 33 points, 12 rebounds, only 3 assists and 5 turnovers, but he was super aggressive in this game. Got to the free throw line a ton, which is what you want.
Mhm.
And then made some big plays, right? Jalen Duren had 12 points and 13 rebounds, had 5 fouls, and was able to avoid staying out of foul trouble after a bunch of guys, made some really poor decisions in terms of fouling at different points in the game. They fouled Brunson on some pump fakes. Didn't look great. Tobias Harris with 15 and 13, right? Surprisingly, somehow being better than Paul George this year. Pretty interesting to see. Hardaway 0 for 8, but Dennis Schroeder, another veteran, making big plays, 20 points, 3 assists, 2 rebounds. Hit the big 3 to put the Pistons up. Also hit the dagger free throws. And, this was kind of the value of adding those veteran guys in the offseason for the Pistons, right? And then obviously for Dennis Schroeder, he was added there at the trade deadline. And, that's the value of having guys like that because a guy like Dennis Schroeder can be unpredictable, but he is a guy that has been in some playoff series. We know he competes, and he can have games, right, where he can help you win. We've seen him do it before. He can also, I guess, in some ways hurt you, but, in a way, like he brings a lot of value to the team, right? And, it just a really impressive performance, especially defensively from the Pistons, because they were very physical and they made it really tough for the Knicks on the offensive end. Keith Wells, the Knicks lucky not to be 0-2. That's what I'm talking about, right? We're like, in both of these series, it's one apiece, but it could easily be 0-2 for
Mhm.
either team,
Mhm.
right? Like the Knicks, if they don't have the 20 to nothing run, could have lost the first game. Of course, you can say should have, would have, could have, but just that's the reality. And then in this game, they did lose it, and the offense didn't come to fruition. So for the Pistons, again, just like the Clippers, this is the best you could have asked for because if you're Detroit, you were playing with house money in both of these games. You led for most of both games. You just blew it and completely threw it away in the first game, but you were able to finish it off in the second game and complete, your first playoff win, I think, since 2008, right? So we're talking about how long is that? 17 years?
Mhm.
So, that's a very long time. So, congratulations to Detroit for the situation they're in now. But for the Knicks, it's a pretty rough loss because, again, you blew it. I mean, the Pistons, again, pretty much were up wire to wire. And at different points, they were up by double digits. And, again, it felt like the Pistons were going to have a stretch where, all right, they're going to start turning the ball over. the offense is going to disappear, and then the Knicks are going to be able to find a way to, close it out, get some buckets, right? Because that is something that you do have to worry about if you're guarding New York, is that at any time they could get hot, especially if your shots start to fall and then they start to, kind of find ways to score. But it just didn't happen in this game, right? Like, the Pistons out hustled them. Towns didn't have a great game, and you just didn't really get enough from anybody other than Brunson, right? Like, and that's the tough part. You lost by 6, and you look at the box score, and it just feels like, wow, this is a really disappointing game. If you're the Knicks, and if you're the Pistons, great win, and now you go back to Detroit, right, for the chance to possibly take the lead in this series. And we didn't think this was going to happen,
Yeah.
but it has happened, and now they're in a spot where who knows?
Yeah. Shout out to Cade. It starts at the top for sure. If he's not,
Yeah.
aggressive and, not running away and being scared of being blitzed, I think he took it,
Mhm.
on the chin, and he responded, I think, in the best way possible by getting to the free throw line, while also remaining, aggressive and not really, straying away from his game. Because that was the thing, I think, in the first game. You could kind of tell, like, that wasn't really the Cade that we'd seen all season. This was a little bit closer, finding his spots, not letting the Knicks dictate, where he wanted to go. Because, he could still use his body and frame to, find good shots. But, I think the Knicks, they kind of went with the same strategy as the first game, which I didn't really have a problem with. But I think it gets to a point where it obviously wasn't working, I guess it's cool leaving Tobias Harris open. I'll give you that. Tim Hardaway Jr. as well. Malik Beasley. Like, those guys didn't really pop off, It was more so
Right.
we just lost this game to Cade, and we couldn't really find a way to respond and, pick up slack. Because I think when the blame ultimately falls on, I think coaching and also the personnel as well. I think Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Cat, even Josh Hart. I think all those starters except for Brunson needed to find a way to step up in some way, shape, or form. You left way too many points on the board, and way too many missed opportunities. I think like Karl Anthony Towns should have probably been dominating this game and having a similar game that he had in game one, but the aggression wasn't there. Mikal Bridges, we've got to find a way to knock down shots at an efficient rate. You had multiple, I think, almost 3 in a row, wide open threes, and nothing really fell through. And it's like, what are we doing? OG Anunoby, same thing. Offensively, I just didn't really like a lot that I saw outside of Jalen Brunson. And I think that's going to be a potential issue. You didn't have a spark plug coming off the bench versus, Dennis Schroeder. Like, he was their spark plug, and you didn't get anything really from Cam Payne. I guess you got, some solid minutes and solid shots from Miles McBride, but definitely not enough and not in a timely manner compared to what Dennis Schroeder was doing. So I think
Right.
there is that. And, Brunson clearly ran out of gas at the end. Just not an overall good game from the Knicks. And I think it's super embarrassing, considering you were at home, you expected to win this game, and it would have been a big statement, I think, if you went up 2-0. But it's also a testament to how good Detroit is and how, their season wasn't a fluke by any means. They're a good team. They're a fun team to watch, and it all depends on how good Cade Cunningham is going to be at the end of the day. And if he has, games like this where he continues to just be aggressive and not, defer to his veterans, and it's not like I'm saying, just ignore them and put your blinders on, but in terms of, they're not the guys that need to save Detroit when it comes to winning this game. It's got to be Cade Cunningham. He's the guy. So you need to close with him, and he needs to, continue to be aggressive. And that's going to be their pathway to victory. But the Knicks, they got to adjust. I didn't see any adjustments that I liked whatsoever.
Yeah, that's the concern for the Knicks offensively in the playoffs is there going to be a scenario where it's still going to be very reliant on Jalen Brunson being able to, save them? And again, he was still really good in this game, 37 points and 7 assists.
Yeah.
But you still needed another guy. Like Detroit was able to get, like I mentioned, Dennis Schroeder off the bench, like you said, as a spark plug. And you just didn't have that next person, if you're the Knicks. You just, like, if they had one more guy show up, they might have been able to take this game.
I agree.
But, unfortunately, pretty much a lot of Brunson and not much else.
And the
right?
chemistry
So
was way off, I felt like, in terms of the guys. Like, total disconnects, I feel like, all across the board, you know?
Yeah. And again, you're still kind of wondering, like, look at the minute spread, right? 43 or 44 from Brunson.
Yeah.
Could have played more, but he checked out of the game at one point in
Yeah.
the fourth and came back in. Uh, Hart was at 40. OG was at 43. Towns was only at 33, but again, that's because he wasn't really good in this game.
Yep.
And Mitchell Robinson played 20 minutes. And then Bridges was at 38. So again, even on the Piston side, 42 from Cade, 43 from Tobias Harris.
Yeah.
But
Right.
just as a whole, like I said, it just helps to have another guy, and that wasn't the case in this game. So like Keith well said, the Knicks again, they're a 21-0 run away from easily being 0-2, and that's kind of the funny thing about both of these series, right? Like this is a little bit different, but still, just as a whole, I don't know. We picked the Knicks to win in 6, but again, that also means that we think the Pistons can take a game or two,
Yes,
right? So
sir.
they took one. We'll see if the Pistons can pull it off again, but just not great from the Knicks at home. But I do think we'll see them bounce back. But again, it's going to have to be another guy. It can't just be Jalen Brunson.
Yeah, I
Like, and I
agree.
think Towns is the guy that you kind of look at where, again, like even with the matchups, it's not like it's big to big matchup because I don't think because Jalen Duren isn't really guarding him most of the game. It's usually like Tobias Harris or
Yep.
one of the other guys that's a little bit more switchable, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Duren's able to hang back in the paint so
Yep.
that way he can get those blocks and get those
Yep.
rebounds, right? And shout out to him too because again, that's another guy who has not been in the playoffs at all. Didn't look great early in the season, but the latter part of the season has been much better, even in terms of his ability to make reads as a passer,
Agreed. Yeah.
right? Because you didn't really know what you were going to get with him in that aspect, right? Like there's still elements of his game that are very raw,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because even defensively, it feels kind of like he's just a big physical athlete.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily know how great of a defender he is, but
Sure.
he looks like he has improved as a player over the course of the last couple of seasons and over the course of this season. And that's a big thing that's going to help Detroit because, again, you need somebody like that. And Isaiah Stewart didn't play, but Paul Reed did. And, he had a couple moments at different points, right, where
Solid
he was
moments.
able
Yeah.
to kind of, get in there and mix it up. And, again, you need another guy if you're the Knicks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess since we weren't able to do it the day before, we can also just mention, some of the other playoff games, that happened on Sunday, right? Between, the other matchups, right? Where, again, most of them were blowouts, right? We did have one good game, Warriors Rockets, game one. The Warriors ended up winning that one 95-85. And we talked about this in our recent episode, right? Where we know the Warriors have the better high end talent, right? While also being able to defend. But the question was, the Rockets can defend. They have a lot of size. They have rebounding, but can they score? And so far, the answer was no. They can't. They had 85 points, 6 of 29 from 3, 11 of 20 from the line, 34 of 87 from the field, basically 39%, with 16 turnovers. And that to me is going to be the difference between them winning or losing this series is you have to find a way to be able to get some type of offensive creation, but I just don't think they have that. I just don't think they have a guy that you can really trust to be able to get you good offense outside of Şengün. But I think the Warriors will take him just kind of going into the post and, basically trading twos for potential threes, right? Because he played really well, but no one else for Houston really played well aside from Steven Adams gave him good minutes. Jabari Smith Jr. gave him some good minutes, but you need somebody in that backcourt on the perimeter to be able to give you something. And both Van Vliet and Jalen Green offensively were atrocious.
Yeah, overall very disappointed in Jalen Green, but we already talked about it in the live stream. We kind of predicted that Jalen Green was probably not going to really pop off. Considering the trend and that stat line that they put up, I think where like he just didn't even hit like double figures in like the last like what 4 something regular season
Yeah.
games, and then in
Yep.
this game continued the trend and shot 3 for 15 from the floor, and then 0 for 4 from 3, and just was absolutely horrible. Do I expect him to continue that trend? I mean, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to say no, if you want me to be honest, because all the
Yeah.
evidence kind of points towards that just being his identity. Warriors in 5. It's looking like that might be the case. If their offense continues to trend like how it is, and I mean, we talked about it in the regular episode. I gave them the benefit of the doubt offensively because I didn't watch the most Houston Rockets basketball because I thought that it was more so an issue of, well, a lot of our shots are going to come at the end of the shot clock, and there are a lot of grenades, and guys who are more prone to taking grenade shots are going to be your guards. So I thought it was more so, okay, Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green are somewhat the only perimeter creators on this team, so of course they're going to get a bunch of grenade shots. But now I'm looking at it and I really see what this Houston Rockets offense is like. My God, that is not the case. It's just a bunch of inefficient shot chucking, and that's going to be what probably loses them the series. And it doesn't help that the opponent that they have been matched up against with Golden State has stellar defense. That does not help. It would be different if we were
Along with
talking.
two guys that can give you high level shot making.
Exactly. And it'd be different if we were talking about a team that was maybe ranked a little bit more lower in the defensive, ratings and stuff like that. Then I think Houston might have a better chance. But as of right now, I feel like their light has kind of been snatched from them. I need to see how they respond in game 2, but we had even talked about in the last live stream that we did. It would be more demoralizing for Houston to lose game 1 than it would be, if the Warriors lost game 1 because they know how to respond.
Yeah, and again, there were things about Golden State to not really like.
Agreed.
There were a lot of guys played in that game that those are the guys you're going to have to trust if you're going to make a deep run. You're going to have to hope that Quentin Post knocks down threes, which he didn't in this game, but maybe he could. You're going to have to hope that Buddy Hield, is an actual playoff player, which I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest he's not. Even on a team that's got guys like Stephen Curry and Draymond, I think there's a lot of evidence to show Hield is probably not going to perform in the playoffs. If you can get him to hit a couple shots, that's fine. But he just doesn't seem like a guy you can trust. Kevon Looney, they barely play him against a giant team. Guy Santos getting minutes over Kuminga. Again, there's an argument from the perspective of they just don't feel like you need what Kuminga does. And I think it can work against a team like Houston. But I don't think that can really work as well against some of the better teams. But this is why you weren't really super worried about Golden State going home early in the first round, because they got what I felt like was a pretty favorable matchup. You're going against a young team with not a lot of experience and a lot of weaknesses on the offensive end that, again, crazy thing is that the Warriors went up by 20 and the Rockets were still in this game, not because they got hot from 3, not because Jalen Green or Fred VanVleet started to catch fire, but they just got every single offensive rebound, and there was nothing Golden State could do because they were so small. But even then, by the time you get it to a 2-possession game, then you have to kind of say, like, all right, now somebody has to be able to kind of get going. And they just don't have that. And again, do I expect Steph to shoot 60% from the field every game? No. Do I expect Jimmy Butler to shoot over 50% from the field every game? Probably not. But they don't have to, because again, look at Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green. 7 for 34 from the field. I mean, they both shot 20% and 15% or 13% on threes. And that's been a problem for Houston all season long. They're not a good three-point shooting team. And I just don't think they're ready. It feels like a team that if they had one more guy, say if something happens in the summer, then they'd be perfectly fine. But with the group they have right now, they've had a great season. They're still, I think, a really good team. But I think this is a tough matchup for them. But either way, I don't know. Because, again, like, the Warriors played well in this game. But there's still elements that I feel like I would like to see more of. But I don't think we're going to get. Like, we talked about it. We're not the biggest Kuminga fans. But I don't think he'll play. I think they're just like, we're going to have Steph and Draymond and Jimmy. And we're going to hope and pray that Moses Moody and Pods and maybe Peyton or Post or Hield or Looney can give us something, and I think you'll be fine against Houston. But and again, they're also playing 40 minutes, and again, multiple days off in the first round, and that'll be fine. But I think in the later rounds, that's where you're a little bit more concerned. But again, like I said, this is the reason why I picked Golden State to win this series. I think there's a game where Houston could catch fire from 3, but Can you do it 4 out of 7 times? I don't know. And there will be probably at least a game where Steph or Jimmy Butler doesn't shoot as well. It's gonna happen,
Yeah.
probably. But again, this is my point of even guys like Amen Thompson, and Dylan Brooks are great defenders. But guys like Steph and Jimmy Butler, it may just not matter in some games. I mean, look at the shots that Steph made. Those are the type of shots that if you're the defense, you live with, but he made them. It just felt like every time the Rockets got some key stops, it didn't matter, right? Like how many times, if you go back, even if you didn't rewatch it, just watching the game, how many times did the Rockets get the shot clock down to 1 or 0? Didn't matter at all. And, again, I don't think it'll happen every game, but I just find it difficult for Houston to be able to win 4 times. Maybe they could get 2, because I picked the Warriors in 6, but I don't know. Like it's hard to base it off of one game because there are guys on this Warriors team that I don't know. I just don't really trust them at all. But I think you'll be okay against Houston.
Yeah, if the Rockets lose this next game, the series is automatically over. I don't think that they can recover from 2-0. If it's 1-1, I think they 100% can still win it in 7.
Yeah. Then moving on, we also had on the opposite end, this was not a super competitive game outside of the first quarter, and that was the Lakers and Wolves, right? Where the Lakers got annihilated. Oh wait, we don't need to talk about that game. My bad.
Yeah,
That's
we
what
talked
happens
about
when
that one, I
30.
think.
OKC, Memphis. I guess we'll get into that because the other games were not really quite as great, but OKC demolishing, just annihilating the Memphis Grizzlies, won by 51 points. I believe that's the biggest margin in a first round series. And it's one game. Do we expect the Grizzlies to lose by 50 every single game? Probably not, right? There'll be a game where I think it'll be more competitive. But in this game, I think you saw 2 things. You saw why OKC is considered the favorite to come out of the West by a decent margin. Just what they're able to do on the defensive end against good teams is a major problem for a lot of these other teams because they have a bunch of guys who are long, who are physical, who are athletic. They can switch. They can go big. They can have 2 bigs. They can have 1 big who's, can stretch the floor. They can have 1 big who's more of an inside guy. Hardenstein can pass. They have a lot that they can work with, and they're very deep. I mean, everybody played in this game, obviously, because they won by 50, right? But just the fact that, like, they have these random guys that can come in, that can mix things up on both ends of the floor, that's a luxury to have. Even a guy like Aaron Wiggins, right, who just kind of comes in and has 21 off the bench for them. It's just that, again, that's a crazy luxury to have. Even a guy like Kenrich Williams, who used to be a pretty consistent rotational player, he doesn't play as much now because he doesn't need to, right? Caruso played like 10 minutes in this game, plus 30. I mean, everybody was going to have a pretty high plus minus aside from the guys who came in at garbage time.
Mm-hmm.
Even a guy like an AJ Mitchell, right? He comes in and he played a lot for them earlier in the season. I think he had an injury that kept him out for a very long time. But he comes in and you're like, oh my goodness, I forgot about this guy, right? And he's a guy that's got some elements of his game that I think, there's a lot to like there. I mean, he's a rookie, but, and then also the key for OKC is the 3-point shot. 35% from 3, which isn't crazy, but just the fact that if the 3-point shots fall for them and they get what they're going to get on the defensive end, they're going to roll through the West, I think. And then the other thing that you saw, this is why Memphis isn't viewed as a super serious team, because when they play good teams, they don't look as good. And it's been that way for a couple of months. Ja was okay, but not really. 6 for 17. I know he's playing through some ankle soreness and injuries. And then after that, Desmond Bane, 3 for 12. Plus minus of minus 51, the worst in a playoff game ever. It's not a good distinction to have. Jaren Jackson Jr., 2 for 13. That's a guy that you would think physically should be able to overpower, the Thunder in some spots. But he just wasn't really able to do that. And again, it's one game. You don't really want to take away too much from it. But again, I think you saw why people, are very high on the Oklahoma City Thunder. Despite similar to Houston, they're a pretty young team as well that doesn't have a lot of playoff experience. But unlike Houston, I guess you could make the case they're a little bit more seasoned. Not really. It's one postseason run. But they also have more talent. And they have a guy in SGA that I think you can trust. He wasn't even really that good in this game offensively. He helped out on the defensive end, but they didn't need him to be. You didn't, have to have anybody play an A-plus game. I mean, because they were able to shut off Memphis's water completely. I mean, again, outside of Ja, you just don't have a lot of high-level playmaking, and that's a big problem against a team that is going to force you to turn the ball over. If you're a team that turns the ball over a lot, which we know Memphis does, you're not winning.
Yeah, I mean, going into this series, I called it as a sweep, and I think I'm going to stand by that. And for Memphis, I don't even really know what to say. At this point, there was it was a tumultuous season, to say the least. Lots of ups and downs. The highs were high, the lows were low. And I feel like, they might have overreacted multiple times in the past, few years, breaking up the core that did get them the second seed that one year. I think maybe moving on from Dylan Brooks and Tyus Jones maybe wasn't, the smartest thing to do. Maybe it was a little premature. I get it though. It, can't really go back and fix those things, but I think you're kind of feeling the ramifications of those things right now because, your wing depth is pretty much shot. Your bench is so, especially defensively. I think that's where they truly struggle on that end of the floor. But yeah, having no wings, and I'm not saying like, having those wing guys makes this a competitive series by any means. I still think it would have been a sweep because Shea and J-Dub are such, tough covers, but at least you wouldn't get, I think, embarrassed like this because this is just really, really tough, to come out of the play-in just to pretty much automatically kind of have that label of getting swept, I think is probably the worst possible thing that could have happened. And, I don't really know what they do from here in that regard. But, for Oklahoma City, this is probably the best reward that you possibly could have had. You're the number one seed overall as well. And you're proving it. You're showing it because I feel like if they didn't come out and dominate, there would have probably been a lot of haters on Oklahoma City, and though it's not like they don't have haters. There's tons of haters, and I feel like they would have been a little bit louder. But I think they've quieted a lot of the chatter and the noise about them. And it's one game, and it is the first round, and you do expect this team to win, but to win in such a dominant fashion, and SGA didn't even have remotely a good game at all, I think speaks volumes to how great this team truly is.
This is the best team in the Western Conference, I think. The Western Conference is super competitive. The later rounds will be more difficult for them, but I expect them to make it out of the West pretty much unscathed.
Agreed.
It's a matter of whether or not they can win it all. I didn't have them winning the title, but I do have them making the finals.
Agreed.
Yeah. Then moving on, the other games, pretty underwhelming. Don't really have to say a whole lot about them, right? I mean, you had Heat, Cavs, right? And the Cavs pretty much took care of business against the Heat. 121-100. This is another series that I think is going to be pretty quick. This was the one. Yeah, this was the one that I think I was the most confident in being a sweep, and I just didn't really feel like the Heat were going to be able to have much to offer. Oh, we have, let's see in the chat, nice. OG is not the same ever since Brunson came back to the Knicks. I'm assuming he's talking about when he came back from injury, right? Because because there was a long stretch where OG was carrying the Knicks offensively.
Yeah.
Where he was putting up big numbers. I mean, with Brunson back, I don't feel like you have to have him put up those type of numbers, but I think the difference between him having the game he had in game 1 versus the game in game 2 is pretty stark.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I think I'd like to find a nice medium where he can give you like pretty consistent offense. I feel like 10 is probably pretty low for him. Just given the fact that, like, again, he's not like the number one go-to one-on-one type scorer, but he is a guy that can take advantage of certain matchups. He's a good shooter. He's very strong. So, it feels like it would be nice if they could kind of maybe do some more stuff to kind of free up some of the other Knicks offensive players. It just felt like, it's too much Brunson, I think. And that part of that's like Brunson's game. But again, if the Knicks want to go far, they need everybody to contribute. And some of that's not, and a lot of that's not even really on him. Some of it's just, some of those guys just stunk.
Yeah, the lack of aggressiveness, I think, from, Cat, OG, and Mikal Bridges really was probably infuriating, I think, to a lot of Knicks fans because, you look at Mikal Bridges, he was supposed to be the guy to put the team, in a different stratosphere, in terms of okay, you're the real Swiss Army knife alongside OG Anunoby because you can do things on both ends of the floor. And then Karl Anthony Towns and what he's able to do on the offensive end, at all three levels, you kind of expect that night in, night out. And when you have games like this where the offense looks horrible and it's only Jalen Brunson, putting out 100% effort and 100% aggression, it sucks. It really does. And I think, to do it against the Pistons in the playoffs, I think it's probably the worst stage that you possibly could have done it at. And you did it at home as well. And there was just no real fight and response from, the other guys outside of Brunson.
Mikal Bridges equals 5 first round picks equals 3 out of 11
See?
threes. And that's the
And
tough
I know
part,
he's a Knicks fan. I can just tell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the tough part because this is a guy in Brooklyn who was a guy that had some creation ability, right? Like even more than what you saw in Phoenix. But we know in Phoenix, he had a specific role, right? Whereas in Brooklyn, he was kind of the go-to guy after the Durant and Kyrie trades. And I think you were hoping for a mix of both where you can get 3-and-D from the Suns, but also a little bit more offensive creation,
100%.
right? So that way it doesn't have to be just Brunson, because that would be the best version of the Knicks, ideally, where you have multiple guys that can hurt you in different spots. But, if you're not doing that with Bridges, then it's kind of up to like OG, do you have it tonight? Josh Hart, can you hit some threes? Towns, can you do your thing? And it's just like, it's not the ideal situation. Because, like the Knicks team last year, had a lot of depth and talent, but that was also kind of like because of all the injuries, especially by the end, a lot of Brunson. And that's a lot to ask out of one guy to get you through like multiple playoff rounds. And it can probably work against Detroit, but, I think you need more from the other guys not named Jalen Brunson. Like we talked about, like we feel like the Knicks should win the series based off of just talent alone. And if all their guys play relatively well, then they should be fine. But if you have stinkers, then at least see that he has life in him will be enough. Yeah, so like at least he was better in this game than he was in the first game, and they won the first game.
And I mean, I do like him taking 20 shots, or around that, 18 shots, but they got to fall through the net, because there's no point if it's inefficient. And I get it, a lot of them were wide open, but at the same time, bro, like you were supposed to be that guy who puts the ball, through the hoop. If OG's shot isn't falling, if Towns' shot isn't falling, you're supposed to pick up the slack. And you're kind of just adding more. And I feel like it's not necessarily dead weight, but we're getting close to that territory where, it's becoming the Jalen Brunson backpack show. And I hope that doesn't happen, throughout the rest of the series, because they can't afford, to do that. And if this series goes any further, if this series goes 7, I have no hope for that team, past this round. I really don't,
Right. And that's the thing where we talked about in previous streams where the playoffs are going to dictate a lot of probably what happens in the summer, because we know there's going to be teams that are going to not be happy with the end result, where somebody's going to go out in the first round that feels like, man, how did we, give away this series?
Yeah.
And then they're going to look towards some of these other guys that are in these other situations, and then they're going to look at, do we maybe go out and trade for this guy, right? And the Knicks felt like they were doing that ahead of time with Towns and Bridges. And Towns, by and large, has lived up to, the hype. Obviously, he wasn't very good in this game.
Agreed.
But Bridges, I think, is definitely the one where you feel disappointed, because even defensively, it just doesn't feel like he's the same guy.
Yeah.
And at least you would have thought defensively he would bring it every night. But, it depends on the matchup. Like sometimes he just doesn't have it, because like Cade went off, and you would at least think like, okay, OG, you got him for a stretch. Bridges, you have him for a stretch. He's not as strong as OG, but in theory, he's got length. He's not a completely small guy, but just disappointing, I would say. But we'll see what happens. But
losing Hartenstein hurt like a lot, bro. Like, you can see that they're hurting still off of that.
Yeah, and that would be another guy that, again, not necessarily a scorer, but at least could give you, some other options, because, last year in the playoffs, that was a guy where even beyond the push floater shot, right, he could, you could run some things with him offensively where he can play at the top of the key and kind of find, cutters or, maybe playing handoffs. Like you mentioned, DiVincenzo, same thing. And, again, we'll see what happens with the Knicks in the playoffs, but it does feel like it's definitely a different team from last year. Like you feel like it's more talented,
Agreed.
but I don't really know what to expect if the offense isn't going to be able to come around, because that's their bread and butter is their offense. And if they don't have that, if they're going to score less than 100 points, they're probably going to lose more likely than not.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. And then more talented with less drive.
That's
What
an
do you think of
interest.
that?
That's an interesting take. I mean, you could tell that. I feel like they're not as I guess hard knocks as
Yeah.
last year. Not to say that
Last
they're
year's team was a
soft,
lot more. Yeah.
but
Last year's
like
team was a lot more crappy, I think.
yeah, like I feel like they really had that dog in them last year. But part of that identity has been shaved off, I think, due to the personnel changes. Some guys aren't really like cut from that cloth. Like I don't think Cat is really looked at as like a tough guy or a scrapper. He's more so looked as looked at as the opposite, which is fine, and that's not like a knock on him because he's still a phenomenal player on the
Right.
offensive end. But I think when it comes to the playoffs, you got to be locked in and dialed in. Like, there's no
Yeah.
reason he shouldn't have dominated this game like he did in the first one because you're the number two, bro. Like, you're supposed to pop off alongside Jalen Brunson and help him out. But tonight he had no help.
Yeah. But I guess, back to this Heat Cavs thing. I mean, this was, again, like we said, we don't have to say a whole lot about it. I mean, this was kind of, again, similar to OKC. This is the best thing you could have hoped for if you're the Cavs, where you have a relatively easy first round matchup against a team that has very little chance of really beating you in a 7-game series, may not even get a single game. And for the Cavs, who've had a really good regular season, tailed off a little bit in the latter part of the regular season, especially defensively, right now they get to go into the playoffs and they get to have the ability to kind of, shake the rust off, get guys back into a rhythm. And, that's what you saw mostly with the backcourt, right? With Mitchell and Garland, and then even Ty Jerome off the bench. And that's going to be key for them. Is their offense and their depth. And then, if a guy like Ty Jerome can pop off the bench, then, they're going to be able to go a lot further than, the second, third round. Because this is another team similar in the vein of Boston and Oklahoma City that's looked at as a title favorite.
Yeah.
Then I think, yeah, we have another comment. Cat is a better shooter taking threes than Unicorn, and the Unicorn takes 3 times more shots than Cat. When Cat only took 2 threes tonight, no excuse. Trade the coach. Trade him where?
I mean, he's got a point though, and then that's what I was talking about earlier, where I didn't like the adjustments on both ends of the floor. I feel like you guys have got to run certain sets for certain guys. If it's not falling for Bridges, don't shake his confidence, of course, and take shots away from him. But you got to look in the other direction. Like Towns needs to have the ball in his hands, and he needs to be aggressive with that mindset. Same thing with OG, respectfully.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, and like, we talked about it where some of the matchups dictate a little bit as well. Because, like, Detroit is putting a guy like Tobias Harris on Towns because they don't want him to be able to just kind of go off from 3, right? Like, if he's, and like he said, he doesn't take as many threes as maybe a guy like Porzingis at times. But just as a whole, that's what Detroit is trying to do. They're kind of trying to get him off the 3-point line and kind of force him into those drives that, at different points, especially last year, felt a little bit more out of control, a little bit less efficient, but he's been really good with it this year. And that's part of what makes him so dangerous as an offensive player when he has that room to attack. But, again, part of it's what Detroit's doing. But, yeah, well, again, I think the Knicks will bounce back. But, again, it starts with their offense, I think, for sure.
Yeah, that's their identity.
Yeah. But yeah, in terms of the Cavs Heat thing, like I said, not much to say. The Heat, they're here, but they have no shot against the Cavs. The Cavs are significantly better. This is pretty much a bye for the Cavs, right? Where they get to play, like I said, against a pretty weak first round opponent, so that way they can get back into a rhythm, and that way they'll be ready for whomever they face in the first round, whether it's the Pacers or the Bucks. Looking more like it's the Pacers, but again, not a whole lot to say there.
Yeah, respectfully, pack the Heat up. Yeah, just get them out, bro. Like,
Yeah.
they're a 10 seed posing as an 8 seed. Like, and I guess tip your hat to them for making it somewhat competitive. But yeah, that's a sweep. I have no words for that sweep.
Yeah. Then Celtics, Magic. Orlando might be the only offensive team that might actually be worse than Houston.
They are.
The difference is they do have a guy. They have Paolo, right? So you can at least look forward to that from a Magic perspective. And Franz was okay, just the 3-point shooting isn't there, but just no one else you can really trust on the offensive end. And, they challenged them in the first half. Then in the second half, the Celtics pulled away like we expected to. Even with a relatively mediocre offensive performance from most of their main guys. Then you had Derek White, Drew Holiday, Peyton Pritchard take over. And that's part of what makes the Celtics so dangerous is they have so many guys that you can kind of turn to and kind of find, and they can find ways to get it done on either end of the floor. And then, again, like there's going to be other games where those other guys play a lot better. But this is kind of a similar situation to Cavs Heat, a little bit different because at least, with the Magic, there's, go through the series. Again, Orlando's a very physical team, so there's probably going to be some bumps and bruises. We already saw Tatum with the wrist issue, and then we saw Brown. He was already kind of playing through some knee issues anyways. So outside of that, this is going to be, I think, a relatively quick series, but it'll probably be ugly though.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even really know what to say about this one. I mean, we kind of talked about it.
Yeah. Reps for Paolo, and that's it.
Yeah, we kind of talked about it, in our most recent episode where, it's good experience for Paolo, good experience for Franz. They need to, figure out how they're going to operate and how they're going to play in the playoffs. At least we know so far through one, game, and we know previous series as well. Last year with Paolo that he can be, a guy on a playoff team. It's just a matter of, what does that playoff team look like offensively, defensively? They need to figure out their identity and figure out a way to really get some, offensive shot creation going on there around those guys as well and playmaking, but also not lose out on that, tough defensive identity because their defense is so good, but their offense is so poor that, it really makes you wonder, what are we even doing here? And we talked about it in the episode that came out today where, at one point they were looked at as a very deep team. You could kind of just put a bunch of guys out there during the regular season and they would, will themselves to wins, offensively and defensively. But in the playoffs, that's not really going to cut it. And, Cole Anthony, Anthony Black, guys like that, can you really rely on them where, we have Corey Joseph starting for the Orlando Magic? And I'm not really sure how I feel about that, considering that you do have some young talent, but it's, they're way too raw. And I think that speaks volumes on where Orlando is in their development. I think the potential is there for them to be, an Eastern Conference contender, maybe a couple years from now, but maybe even 3 really. But realistically right now, like you said, it's good reps for them. But I think Celtics will probably end up sweeping this thing because they just cannot find any life offensively.
Yep. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, just a tough situation to be in. Even with Jalen Suggs, like if they were fully healthy, remember they were playing really well, and they were towards the top of the Eastern Conference. Then the injuries came, and just a tough season for them, right? Where it felt like they were taking a step forward, but they still probably need a guy in the offseason. And there'll be more time to talk about Orlando once they presumably get eliminated. But just moving ahead, 3 games tomorrow. What are we thinking? One on NBA TV. So if you don't have NBA TV, you won't be able to see it. And that's the Bucks Pacers. Again, we talked about that in our last live stream and in our last episode where it's pretty ugly for the Bucks. Nobody got anything going offensively other than Giannis. And Indiana basically just had a very balanced offensive attack. Didn't have a crazy scoring game from Halliburton, but you didn't need it. He was able to control the game. Everybody got everything they wanted. Siakam at 25, a bunch of guys in double figures. And defensively, they limited the Bucks to, very rough offensive attempts. Like it felt like what we talked about where we did pick the Bucks to win the series, but now we look kind of dumb because like we made the case of Pacers are the better team. Maybe Giannis could get them over the top. We knew they needed Dame. Maybe he plays in game 2. We don't really know. He is upgraded to questionable, but what type of value is he going to bring? Does he have enough offensively? He was playing very well before the blood clots. But it's probably going to take him some time to get back to that. I'd be very surprised if, even if he plays, I'd be very surprised if he looked just as sharp as he did before that happened. Maybe it happens, but it has to happen in order for the Bucks to win this series. Without Lillard, you just don't have a shot. Yeah. So, I mean, if he doesn't play, I think they're definitely going to lose. Maybe they have a shot if he plays, but even then, it just feels like the Pacers are better. So I'm probably picking the Pacers to win game 2.
Yeah, I'm picking them as well. I don't think Milwaukee takes a W until they travel back to back home. I think they need the home court advantage. They need a little bit of rest so they can potentially figure something out. But I think with them being in Indiana, and Indiana's a tough environment to play in as well. A lot of people talk about Oklahoma City and environments like that, but Indy's a rough one too. So I think that will be a factor as well. And Dame or no Dame, I think Indiana's got this one in the bag.
Yeah. Then Memphis OKC, the first of the 2 TNT games. I think we're picking OKC to probably win that one. I don't think it'll be quite as horrible for Memphis, but I still expect Oklahoma City to win that game. Again, kind of like the Indiana one. I think OKC's better. I think they have more options, and I think they can just shut down Memphis's offense. And I just don't really see an ability for Memphis to win unless all their guys, especially their big 3, play very well. And it just feels like OKC can do a really good job of limiting pretty much all of their main guys, right? Like, it just felt pretty rough from a Memphis perspective.
Yeah, give me Oklahoma City by like 25. I think that's good. Cut the deficit in half. I still think it'll be done, handedly.
Yeah.
I have no faith in this Memphis team. They're hurt. They're vulnerable. They don't have a wing to stop any of Oklahoma City's guys offensively. And yeah, I think they're just going to get bullied off the floor again.
Yeah. Then Lakers Wolves. This was the one where we got it wrong in game 1. The Wolves dominated the Lakers in game 1. Right? They outshot them, looked better on both ends of the floor, looked bigger, more athletic, more physical. You got a pretty rough game from LeBron and Austin and most of the other role players outside of Luka, right? Luka was really the only one who had, a good game, I would say. Pretty much everybody else was average to below average, right? What are we looking for in game 2? Because it felt like the Lakers just were in a different world in terms of like the level of preparation, and whereas the Wolves felt like they were very much ready to go into LA to take that game, right? And there were other things too, like the Lakers just defensively just kind of stunk, gave up a ton of threes, didn't get rebounds, but even on the offensive end, they weren't very good either, right? Just an overall pretty horrible game, ugly game from the Lakers outside of the first quarter. I believe the Lakers will bounce back, right? I expect them to win and have a much better outing in game 2. But this, to me, is a must-win game for LA. I think if they lose this game as well, they're going to lose this series. But Minnesota, you can't take them lightly because we've seen them go into Denver and shut off Denver's water 3 times, actually. And they did it in the first 2 games in Denver before they lost the next 3 games in Minnesota, I think, right? But just as a whole, I expect the Lakers to be better, and I expect LeBron and Austin to be better. I don't think they're going to lose this game. I'd be kind of surprised if they, got blown out again. If they do, then it's a sign that the Wolves are probably just better and they're going to take care of business. But I think the Lakers will win this one.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I don't foresee the Lakers losing, 2 in a row. And more so, I don't think that they would lose another one at home. You know what I mean? I feel like that factor has to come into play at some point because they were so good at home throughout the majority of the regular season. And I feel like, that doesn't just happen where that switch turns off like that. Like something was truly wrong in terms of the preparation and, the mentality of the Lakers going into that game 1. Like you said, there was a clear difference in terms of, preparation and execution as well. So I think, the Lakers will come prepared. I think JJ's going to make some adjustments, hopefully. I think he has probably something up his sleeve, for this Minnesota team. And I think, it's probably going to be a battle. I think it's going to be a hard-fought battle. I don't think it's going to be one of those games where, they're going to get blown off. One team is going to get blown off the floor. I think this is going to be more of a duel. And I think the Lakers will have that advantage if it comes down to something like that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, we're actually at our hour and 15 mark. So, I know it's kind of more of an impromptu stream. I know we said that we, probably weren't going to stream a whole lot until, eliminations. But, we were both free and able to, and we weren't able to stream, that Easter. So, shout out to everybody who was in the chat. We know, Xander Cage, shout out you. you are a longtime supporter. Shout out Untamed for always making the streams entertaining. Shout out Keith Wells for amazing comments as usual. And shout out Nice. I think you were a new face as well. And yeah, you had some great takes, I think, on the Knicks. And, being a Knicks fan, I'm sure was a struggle tonight. But, we will probably be streaming the next time that there is an elimination or there's, a team on the brink of elimination, something like that. We did record an episode and we did put it out today. So please go and check that out. It was our in-depth thoughts, on breakdowns and analysis on what happened during the games over the weekend. And yeah, before we head out of here, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast. And we will see you guys on the next stream. Thank you very much.